Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into something that's really important in Wisconsin, the Model Early Learning Standards.
That's right.
And, when I first heard about this document, I thought it was just a checklist for kindergarten readiness. But as I started to read it, I realized it's so much more than that.
Yeah, it really is a fascinating document. It really is.
So we're going to be diving deep into those standards themselves, but also, the developmental expectations, the continuums, and all those practical examples that they have.
Right, yeah. And one of the first things that struck me about this document was how it frames the role of parents and caregivers and educators.
Hmm.
It starts by acknowledging that parents are a child's first and most important teachers.
Yeah.
But it goes on to say that families, communities, and schools all share the responsibility for a child's well-being.
It's like creating this web of support around each child. And that's so crucial because we know that children who feel valued are more likely to thrive, not just academically, but emotionally and socially as well.
That's right. And I think that leads us nicely into the first domain that the WMLs covers, health and physical development. It seems like they're really laying the groundwork for everything else by focusing on a child's physical well-being first.
That's interesting. When I think health and physical development, I tend to think, big picture.
Right.
Like, are they eating healthy foods? Are they getting enough exercise?
Right.
But the WMLs actually get super granular. They even break down, like, how babies signal hunger.
Oh, it's not just about crying, is it?
Yeah.
The guide points out that babies might root for the nipple or make sucking motions long before they dissolve into tears.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it in such detail before.
And what's fascinating is that by responding promptly to these subtle cues, we're not just meeting their physical needs, we're helping them develop a sense of trust and security. And that secure attachment in those earliest years actually has a huge impact on their emotional and social development down the line.
It's like those tiny interactions have ripple effects that we might not even be aware of in the moment.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another domain that I think is often underestimated, self-help skills.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll admit, when I first saw that section, I thought, okay, this is going to be about potty training and zipping up coats, which, don't get me wrong, is important.
Right.
It-
But there's so much more to it. The WMLs really highlight how these seemingly simple skills are actually building blocks for independence, self-esteem, and confidence.
You're right. I've always focused on the practical side of things, like, can they dress themselves? Or can they eat without making a mess?
Right.
But I never really stopped to think about how each little victory, like mastering a zipper or pouring their own milk,
Right.
how that contributes to their overall sense of self.
And the guide even acknowledges that these things don't always come easily. Remember those classic toddler struggles like resisting naps?
Oh, tell me about it.
So instead of getting frustrated, the WLs suggest using calming phrases like, "You're acting like you're tired. You will feel better after you rest for a while."
That's so much better than just saying, like, go to sleep.
Right.
It's validating their feelings while still encouraging the desired behavior.
Exactly.
It's brilliant.
It's all about meeting them where they are developmentally, and that's a theme that runs throughout the WMLs.
Speaking of meeting them where they are, let's talk about social emotional learning.
Okay.
I was really struck by how much emphasis Wisconsin puts on this, even from a very young age.
Yeah,
It's not just about ADCs and 123s, is it?
not at all. The WMLs make it clear that emotional intelligence is just as important as cognitive intelligence. They emphasize the importance of helping children understand and express their emotions, recognize and respond to the feelings of others,
Yeah.
and develop those all-important conflict resolution skills.
And it's not just about being nice or following rules.
Right.
It's about giving them the tools to navigate the complex world of relationships.
Exactly. And that includes understanding how their own actions and words impact others.
One thing that really stood out to me in this section was how detailed the WLs are in describing those early social and emotional milestones.
Right.
It's not just a vague notion of, like, they should be able to share toys.
Right.
They actually break down how a child might express jealousy, how they might navigate a conflict over a toy. It even covers how children react to arguments between adults.
Wow, that's a powerful point.
Yeah.
It underscores how deeply children are affected by their environment and the relationships around them.
It reminds us that we're modeling behavior all the time, whether we realize it or not.
Absolutely. And those early experiences shape their understanding of how relationships work, how to express themselves appropriately, and how to navigate social situations.
It's foundational stuff. And speaking of foundational, I'm really excited to delve into the next domain, Learning through play. It feels like Wisconsin really gets it when it comes to recognizing that children learn best through hands-on experiences.
You're right. They don't see play as a frivolous activity, but as the very foundation of learning.
And they actually provide a lot of guidance on how to set up those play-based learning experiences. One detail that really stood out to me was the suggestion of providing unbreakable mirrors for infants.
Now, why do you think they emphasize that?
I think it's because it helps babies develop self-awareness.
Yeah.
They're fascinated by their own reflections, and those early interactions contribute to their understanding of themselves as individuals.
Exactly. It's such a simple thing, but it speaks volumes about how Wisconsin approaches early learning. They recognize the importance of self-discovery, even from a very young age.
And they see play as a way to foster that self-discovery,
Precisely. It's not just about keeping kids entertained. It's about setting up an environment where learning is intrinsically enjoyable.
where they're driven by curiosity and a sense of wonder, not by pressure or rewards.
Absolutely. And when children are engaged in that kind of playful exploration, they're not just learning facts or skills, they're developing their cognitive abilities, their social emotional intelligence, and their creativity.
It's holistic.
It is.
And that brings us to another area where Wisconsin seems to go above and beyond: language development.
Mm.
I get the sense that they're looking at language as more than just vocabulary acquisition.
You're picking up on something really important there. The WMLs take a much broader view of language development, focusing on listening skills, following directions,
Okay.
understanding sentence structure,
Wow.
and even recognizing different languages.
It's like they're acknowledging the incredible complexity of language
Yes,
and how children gradually build those skills over time.
exactly. And they point out that those early attempts at communication, even before a child speaks their first word, are laying the groundwork for future language development.
I remember when my niece was a baby, she used to babble constantly, and it was like she was trying to make sense of the sounds around her.
And the guide encourages adults to respond to those babbles as if they were meaningful conversations.
So it's about having those back and forth exchanges,
Yeah.
even if the baby isn't using real words yet.
It shows them that their communication is valued
Yeah.
and that language is a powerful tool for connection.
And it probably helps them make those connections between sounds and meaning.
Precisely. And as children progress, the guide encourages adults to use consistent language,
Mm.
to label objects and actions, and to read to them regularly.
It's all about creating a rich language environment.
Exactly. And one example that really stuck with me was the observation that a child's first words often represent specific people or objects, like banky for their blanket.
Oh, I remember those days.
The guide encourages adults to use the correct terms, like blanket, but also to acknowledge the child's attempt at communication by saying something like, "You want your banky, here's your blanket."
So it's about meeting them where they are linguistically,
Yes.
but also gently guiding them towards more conventional language.
Exactly. And that approach really highlights the intricate dance between nature and nurture when it comes to language development.
And speaking of building blocks, the final piece of the puzzle we want to touch on today is early literacy and numeracy.
Mhm.
It seems like Wisconsin starts building that foundation for academic skills really early on, but not in the way you might expect.
They're very intentional about approaching these skills through play and real-life experiences.
I love that. It makes learning so much more meaningful and engaging.
For example, in the area of early literacy, they emphasize the importance of exposing children to books from a very young age.
Okay?
Not just reading to them, but letting them explore books independently,
Wow.
turning the pages, looking at the pictures, even mouthing the pages.
It's about developing a love of books, not a fear of reading.
Exactly. And they also highlight the importance of talking about stories, asking questions, and encouraging children to retell stories in their own words.
So it's about building those pre-reading skills through conversation and interaction.
Precisely. And in the area of early numeracy, they emphasize the importance of incorporating math concepts into everyday routines.
Like counting the steps as you walk up the stairs.
Yep. Yeah.
Or sorting laundry by color.
Exactly. And they also encourage adults to use mathematical language in everyday conversations.
Like saying things like, we need 2 more spoons, or this block tower is taller than that one.
It's all about making those connections between abstract concepts and real-world experiences.
So it's not just about drilling number facts or letter sounds.
Right.
It's about embedding those concepts into their everyday lives.
And that's what makes Wisconsin's approach so unique. They recognize that learning doesn't have to be formal to be effective.
It's about creating those aha moments through play, exploration, and everyday interactions.
We've covered a lot of ground today, exploring the key domains of the
We
WMLs,
have.
from health and physical development all the way to early literacy and numeracy, but we've only just scratched the surface.
That's right. There's still so much more to uncover.
And what's coming up next is one of the most fascinating aspects of the WLs, how children approach learning itself.
Stay tuned as we continue our deep dive into this amazing framework for understanding the world of early childhood.
It is fascinating, isn't it? Welcome back to our deep dive into the Wisconsin Model Early Learning Standards.
Now, we've talked a lot about those different areas of development that the WMLs covers, kind of the what of early learning. But this next section really dives into the how. How do kids actually approach the process of learning? It's fascinating to think that even little ones have their own unique learning styles.
And it's remarkable how much attention the WMLs give to this idea. They actually dedicate an entire section to something called approaches to learning.
Okay.
Wisconsin's approach recognizes that every child comes to the learning table, so to speak,
Right.
with their own set of strengths, interests, and ways of interacting with the world.
So it's not just about what they learn,
Right.
but how they engage with learning itself.
Exactly. And this section goes beyond just acknowledging those differences.
Okay.
It encourages adults to really see those individual learning styles as assets, not obstacles.
That makes so much sense. I mean, we wouldn't expect every adult to learn the same way, so why would we expect that from children?
Precisely. And that's why this domain is considered the one most subject to individual variation. It really highlights the beauty of diversity and how children learn.
So let's break down this concept of approaches to learning a little further.
Okay.
What are some of the key characteristics that the WLs highlight?
Well, it all starts with curiosity,
Okay.
that innate drive to explore, to ask questions, to figure things out.
Yeah, I think we can all relate to that. We
Yeah.
all have that inner drive to make sense of the world around us.
The WMLs describe those early signs of curiosity as growing eagerness and delight in self, others, and in surroundings. Even babies exhibit those sparks of curiosity.
You see it in their eyes, like that intense focus when they're watching something new or trying to figure out how a toy works.
Yeah. And as children grow, that spark of curiosity becomes more focused and sustained. They start to show preferences for certain activities,
Okay.
and they're able to attend for longer periods of time.
So it's like that initial flame is growing brighter
Right.
with encouragement and the right kind of fuel.
I love that analogy.
So we start with that spark of curiosity, and then what? What are some of the other characteristics of a healthy approach to learning?
Well, another one that might surprise some people is risk-taking.
No, wait a minute. We're talking about little kids here. Isn't risk-taking kind of dangerous?
Of course, safety is paramount,
Yeah.
but the WMLs are talking about a different kind of risk-taking.
Okay.
It's about encouraging children to try new things, to step outside their comfort zones, to test their limits, and to learn from those experiences.
So it's about finding that balance between keeping them safe
Right.
and allowing them to explore.
Precisely. It's about creating an environment where they feel safe enough to take those leaps of faith, knowing that they won't be ridiculed or punished if they make a mistake.
Because making mistakes is part of learning.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another key characteristic: persistence.
Hmm.
The WMLs emphasize that learning isn't always easy,
Right.
and it often takes effort and determination to stick with a task even when it's challenging.
That grit, that stick-to-itiveness.
Exactly. And think about how often you see that in young children.
Yeah.
They'll repeat an action over and over again, not because they're being stubborn,
Yeah.
but because they're driven to master it.
Like that baby trying to stack blocks, even if they keep falling over.
Or that toddler who insists on putting on their own shoes, even
Yeah.
if it takes 10 minutes and a few frustrated tears.
Right.
It's about encouraging that persistence because it builds resilience and that, like, I can do it attitude.
It's like we're sending them the message.
Yeah.
I believe in you, and I know you can figure this out.
And those messages are so important because when children believe in themselves, they're more likely to take on new challenges and persevere through difficulties.
And then, of course, there's creativity and imagination.
Yes.
It's like those two qualities go hand in hand with a healthy approach to learning.
The WMLs highlight the importance of imaginative play and inventive thinking. They recognize how children use play to make sense of the world around them, to explore different perspectives, to experiment with ideas.
It's like they're creating their own little laboratories of learning.
And the document encourages adults to nurture those skills by providing open-ended materials and plenty of time for unstructured play.
Because Sometimes the best learning happens when we step back and let those little imaginations run wild.
It's about providing a rich tapestry of experiences that stimulate creativity and allow children to discover their own unique voices.
This whole section on approaches to learning really makes me realize how much we can learn from children.
Hmm.
They haven't yet developed all those inhibitions and self-doubts that can hold us back as adults.
They approach learning with this incredible sense of wonder and openness. It's contagious, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
And it's a good reminder that learning should be a joyful process of discovery.
Speaking of discovery, another key element of the WMLs is the recognition of diversity in learning.
Okay.
It encourages adults to really appreciate the different learning styles that children exhibit.
It's about moving beyond that one-size-fits-all approach to education that we often see.
Exactly. The WMLs go beyond just saying that kids learn differently.
Hmm.
They actually highlight a range of learning styles like verbal linguistic, bodily kinesthetic, visual spatial, interpersonal, and interpersonal.
Okay. I'm going to need a little help unpacking all of those.
Of course. So let's start with verbal linguistic learners. These are the kids who are drawn to language, both spoken and written.
Okay.
They might love reading, telling stories, or playing word games.
They often have a large vocabulary and a knack for expressing themselves clearly.
Exactly. Then we have children who are more bodily kinesthetic learners. These are the movers and shakers who learn best through physical activities and hands-on experiences.
They're the ones who are always building with blocks, dancing to music, or acting out stories.
Yeah,
They need to move their bodies to really grasp a concept.
precisely. And then there are the visual spatial learners
Okay.
who thrive when they can see and manipulate objects. They might excel at puzzles, drawing, or building with construction toys. They have a keen sense of space and design.
It seems like it would be helpful to have a mix of these learning styles in a classroom.
It certainly creates a more dynamic and vibrant learning environment,
Yeah.
and it encourages children to learn from each other.
Mm.
Now, you mentioned interpersonal and interpersonal learners earlier.
Yeah.
Those can be a bit more nuanced.
Can you tell me more about those?
Interpersonal learners are all about connection. They thrive in social settings and learn best through collaboration and interaction with others. They love group projects, dramatic play, and working with partners. They're often the social butterflies of the classroom.
And intrapersonal learners. They sound a bit more like me,
They're
actually.
more introspective and independent. They need time for quiet reflection, and they might enjoy activities like journaling, reading, or working on individual projects. They're often deep thinkers and have a strong sense of self-awareness.
So it sounds like the key takeaway here is that there's no one right way to learn.
Right.
And the WMLs really encourage us to honor those individual differences and create learning environments where all children feel comfortable and supported.
Well said. And that's what I find so refreshing about this document.
Yeah.
It's not about forcing children into a mold.
Right.
It's about celebrating their unique strengths and helping them discover their own paths to learning.
And speaking of paths to learning, I'm curious to hear more about how the WMLs approach a domain that we often associate with more traditional academic learning. Cognition and general knowledge. It sounds like they're taking a very different approach than what we might expect.
You're absolutely right. This is where we see Wisconsin really emphasizing how a child's natural curiosity lays the groundwork for developing those crucial thinking skills.
It's like they're encouraging them to become little scientists, explorers, and problem solvers from the very beginning.
Are you ready to dive into this fascinating world of early cognition?
I'm all ears.
Excellent. Let's start by talking about how babies use their senses to explore and learn. We often underestimate the importance of those early sensory experiences.
You mean those early interactions with the world?
Yeah,
Touching, tasting, seeing, hearing, smelling.
right.
It all seems so basic, but I guess it's really where learning begins.
The WMLs describe how infants respond to all that sensory input, like turning their heads toward familiar voices or exploring objects with their mouths. It's all part of their natural drive to learn.
I remember my nephew used to put everything in his mouth.
Yeah.
It was his way of figuring out the world.
And the guide encourages adults to provide a variety of sensory experiences for babies, not just to keep them entertained, but to stimulate their brains and help them make sense of the world around them.
So it's not just about having colorful toys.
Right.
It's about offering a range of textures, sounds, smells, and even tastes.
And it's about paying attention to how babies respond to those different stimuli.
Right.
What do they seem drawn to? What do they avoid? It's all valuable information about how they're learning and growing.
And as babies grow, they start using their senses in more purposeful ways, right?
Exactly. They begin experimenting with cause and effect, which the WMLs point out as a key milestone in cognitive development.
Like dropping a toy from their high chair over and over again just
Yeah.
to see what happens.
Precisely. Or banging on a drum to hear the different sounds it makes.
Oh, yes.
Or shaking a rattle to see how the beads move inside. They're little scientists testing out their theories about how the world works.
It's funny how those things can be so frustrating for parents in the moment. But they're actually signs of healthy cognitive development.
It's all part of the process. And as children's memories improve, they start to connect those sensory experiences with meaning.
Okay.
They're not just reacting to stimuli, they're starting to understand that those stimuli represent something.
So they're building a foundation of knowledge about the world.
Exactly. And as they continue to explore and experiment, they develop problem-solving skills,
Right.
which the WMLs highlight as essential for navigating the challenges of life.
I've always been fascinated by how resourceful young children can be when it comes to problem solving.
It's incredible. They'll find creative ways to get what they want or to figure out how something works. The WMLs describe how it starts with those early attempts to obtain objects that are out of reach.
Like using a stick to retrieve a toy that's rolled under the couch.
Exactly. Or figuring out how to climb onto a chair to reach something on the counter. They're little engineers, designing solutions to everyday problems.
And it's not just about physical problem solving, right?
Right.
They're also starting to develop those cognitive problem solving skills.
Absolutely. As they mature, they start using more sophisticated strategies, like asking for help when they can't solve a problem on their own, which is a big step in developing self-awareness and social skills.
It's like they're learning that it's okay to ask for help,
Right.
that they don't have to figure everything out on their own.
And the WMLs encourage adults to model that behavior as well by showing children that we all need help sometimes.
Right.
We're normalizing that experience and making it easier for them to seek support when they need it.
That's so important. And it makes me think about another key area of cognition, reasoning.
Yes.
It's amazing to me how even young children start to think logically
Right.
and make sense of information.
The WMLs describe how children begin making statements
Okay.
and answering questions that require reasoning about objects, situations, or people. They're not just repeating phrases they've heard, they're starting to form their own conclusions based on their experiences.
So it's about moving beyond those simple yes and no responses to more complex explanations.
Exactly. And as they continue to develop, their reasoning skills become even more sophisticated. They might start to draw inferences from stories, make predictions about what will happen next,
Yeah.
or even offer explanations for their own actions.
It's remarkable to think about how much cognitive growth is happening in those early years.
It really is. And the WMLs offer a roadmap for adults to support that development by providing stimulating environments, encouraging inquiry, and engaging in meaningful conversations.
Yeah.
They emphasize the importance of talking to children about their experiences, asking open-ended questions, and helping them make connections between different ideas.
Now, we've talked a lot about general cognitive development, but what about specific areas like math and science? Those are the domains that often cause anxiety for parents, especially as their children get closer to school age.
And it's understandable why parents might feel that way.
Yeah.
But the WMLs take a very different approach to early math and science learning.
Okay.
They emphasize exploration, play, and real-world experiences.
It's about making learning fun and relevant to their everyday lives.
Exactly. In the math domain, for example, the WMLs emphasize understanding numbers and counting. But it starts with those early experiences of one-to-one correspondence.
Like giving each friend one cookie.
Precisely. Or setting the table with one plate and one napkin for each person.
Right.
Those everyday routines are actually laying the groundwork for mathematical thinking.
It's amazing how much learning can happen in those simple moments.
And as children progress, they start to recognize number symbols, learn to count objects, and even compare quantities.
Okay.
It's a gradual process of building upon those foundational skills.
And it all happens through play and exploration, not through worksheets or drills.
That's what makes it so effective.
Yeah.
Children are naturally curious about the world around them.
Right.
And when we tap into that curiosity, learning becomes effortless.
That's a great segue into the science domain.
Okay.
I'm curious to hear how the WMLs approach early science learning.
Yeah. Much like the math domain, it's all about encouraging children to become little scientists.
To observe, to
Yes.
question, to experiment.
Exactly. The WLs highlight how children use their senses to gather information about the world around them.
And they're not afraid to get their hands dirty. Literally.
That's part of the fun. Whether they're digging in the dirt, splashing in puddles, or mixing colors, children are naturally drawn to exploring their environment. And those explorations lay the foundation for scientific thinking.
So it's not about memorizing facts about the solar system
Right.
or the human body.
Right.
It's about encouraging them to ask questions and seek answers through their own explorations.
Exactly. And the WMLs encourage adults to support those inquiries by providing tools for investigation, like magnifying glasses, binoculars, and even maps.
I love that. It's about equipping them with the resources they need to become active learners.
And as their cognitive skills develop, they start to ask more complex questions and draw conclusions based on their observations. They move beyond simple cause and effect to more sophisticated scientific reasoning.
So they're becoming little detectives, unraveling the mysteries of the natural world.
And the WMLs emphasize the importance of supporting children as they form explanations, make predictions, and test their ideas. It's about nurturing those budding scientific minds and helping them develop a lifelong love of learning.
This whole domain has been a real eye-opener for me. It's incredible to see how even seemingly simple activities can contribute to such profound cognitive development.
It's a reminder that learning should be joyful, engaging, and relevant to children's lives.
We've covered a lot of ground today, exploring those intricate details of the WMLs.
We have.
It's amazing how much thought and care have gone into creating this framework for understanding how children learn and grow.
It really is a comprehensive and insightful document, and we've still got more to uncover. We've explored the core developmental domains. But the WMLs go even further by providing specific examples of how these concepts play out in different learning environments.
That's what we'll be diving into next. Stay tuned as we continue to explore the fascinating world of the Wisconsin Model Early Learning Standards. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've spent the last two segments really unpacking those core developmental domains in Wisconsin's early learning standards. But what I'm really curious about now is how all of this actually plays out in real life. How do these standards translate into creating those nurturing and supportive learning environments that we've been talking about?
That's what makes the WML so unique. They don't just tell us what children should be learning.
Right.
They actually give us a framework for how to support that learning in different settings. It's like they've thought of everything.
So let's talk specifics.
Okay.
What are some of the key areas that they highlight when it comes to creating those enriching learning environments?
Well, one thing that really stands out is the emphasis on providing a variety of age-appropriate toys and materials. And they're not just talking about filling a classroom with random toys.
Right.
They're very intentional about what they recommend for different age groups.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Not at all. For infants, for instance, they suggest toys that stimulate the senses.
Okay.
Things like rattles, mobiles, and soft blocks. They recognize how crucial those early sensory experiences are for brain development.
It's about giving those little brains all the input they need to make sense of the world.
And as babies grow into toddlers, their needs and interests change,
Right.
so the recommendations shift as well.
Okay.
For toddlers, the WM recommend toys that encourage movement, like push toys, balls, and climbing structures.
That makes sense. Toddlers are all about exploring their physical capabilities.
Yes.
They need to move, to climb, to run, to jump.
Right.
It's how they learn about their bodies and their place in the world.
And by providing them with opportunities to do those things in a safe and supportive environment, we're not just helping them develop physically, we're also fostering their cognitive and social emotional growth.
And what about preschoolers?
Okay.
What kinds of toys and materials do the WMLs recommend for that age group?
As you might imagine, things get a bit more complex at this stage. The WML suggests materials that promote imaginative play, problem solving, and creativity. So things like blocks, art supplies, dramatic play props, puzzles, and building toys.
Right.
They're really encouraging that hands-on, minds-on approach to learning.
It's about giving them the tools to explore their own ideas,
Right.
to create their own worlds, to experiment and discover.
And it's not just about the toys themselves.
Okay.
It's about how those toys are used. The WMLs emphasize the importance of creating inviting and well-organized learning centers within classrooms.
Yeah.
I remember when my kids were in preschool,
Yeah.
their classrooms were always set up with these different centers: a reading center, a math center, an art center, a science center, a building center. It was amazing to see how they would gravitate towards the centers that spark their interests.
So it's about giving them choices,
Exactly.
allowing them to direct their own learning.
And by setting up those centers in a way that encourages independence and self-directed learning,
Right.
we're teaching them valuable skills that will serve them well throughout their lives.
Now, we've been talking a lot about indoor learning environments,
Right.
but we can't forget about the importance of outdoor play.
Absolutely. The WMLs are huge advocates for outdoor play, and they provide a lot of guidance on creating stimulating outdoor learning environments.
So we're not just talking about a swing set and a sandbox here.
Not at all. They suggest incorporating natural elements into outdoor play areas, like trees, plants, and rocks. They want children to connect with nature, to experience the wonder of the natural world.
And it doesn't have to be complicated. Even just providing some shovels and buckets for digging in the dirt
Right.
can provide hours of engaging play.
And don't forget the magnifying glasses for examining those creepy crawlies.
I love that. It's about encouraging them to become little explorers, to see their own backyards as places of discovery.
And of course, they also recommend providing outdoor play equipment that encourages physical activity.
Okay.
Climbing structures, tricycles, balls, all those things that help children develop those large motor skills.
It's not just about physical development, though, is it?
Right.
I remember reading somewhere that outdoor play can actually have a really positive impact on children's social emotional development as well.
That's right. When children are playing outdoors,
Yeah.
they have to negotiate those social dynamics. They have to learn to share, to take turns, to cooperate, and they're also more likely to engage in pretend play,
Right.
which helps them develop their imaginations and their social skills. Outdoor spaces can become these magical realms of make-believe.
It's about fostering that sense of wonder and adventure that's so essential for childhood.
And speaking of essential, let's not forget about the importance of routines.
Okay, I'll admit, when I think of routines, I think of like structure and predictability, which are important, of course,
Right.
but I also like worry about stifling creativity and spontaneity.
That's a valid concern. But the WMLs actually address that.
Okay.
They see routines as providing a framework for learning, not a set of rigid rules that must be followed at all costs.
So it's about finding that balance between structure and flexibility.
Exactly. Routines provide that sense of security and predictability that young children need,
Right.
but they also allow for plenty of opportunities for exploration, creativity, and child-led learning.
And those routines themselves can actually become learning opportunities, can't they?
Absolutely. Think about meal times, for example.
Okay.
That's a perfect time to encourage conversation,
Yeah.
to model table manners, and even to introduce new vocabulary words.
And what about transitions? Those can often be challenging for young children.
The WMLs suggest using songs, games, or simple visual cues
Okay.
to help children move smoothly from one activity to the next. It's about minimizing chaos and maximizing learning opportunities.
It's about making those transitions less stressful for everyone involved.
And one final point I want to emphasize is the importance of observation.
Now, this is something that I think is often overlooked,
Yes.
both by parents and educators.
Yeah.
We get so caught up in the doing, in the teaching, in the managing, that we forget to just stop and observe.
And yet observation is one of the most powerful tools we have for understanding children.
Yeah.
The WMLs encourage us to be keen observers of their behavior,
Okay.
to pay close attention to how they're interacting with their environment, with each other, and with the learning materials.
Right.
By observing carefully,
Yeah.
we can gain insights into their interests, their strengths, their areas where they might need additional support.
It's like we become these child development detectives,
Exactly.
gathering clues about how each child learns best.
And those observations inform how we plan activities,
Right.
how we create learning environments, how we interact with children in ways that support their individual needs. We're tailoring the learning experience to each child's unique journey.
You know, this whole conversation has really highlighted for me what a valuable resource the Wisconsin Model Early Learning Standards are.
Yeah.
It's so much more than just a checklist of skills. It's a philosophy of education.
It is.
It's a roadmap for understanding how children learn and grow.
And it's a reminder that we as adults have a responsibility to create those nurturing and stimulating environments where children can thrive.
Well said. So to wrap things up, what would you say is the most important takeaway for our listeners?
I would say this: remember that every child is unique.
Yeah.
They learn at their own pace, in their own way. And it's our job to create learning experiences that honor those individual differences. The WMLs provide us with a framework, but the real magic happens in those everyday moments of interaction, observation, and joyful exploration.
Embrace the wonder of early childhood. Happy learning.